Welcome back, everyone, to the supplemental episode of Bible Talk Insight.
Great to be here.
This week, we're really setting aside some of the noise to tackle a truly magnificent section of Scripture, often misunderstood, too.
Definitely. Revelation chapters 4 through 6.
Exactly. This is where the ceiling of heaven seems to open right up,
Yeah.
and prophetic history gets incredibly intense, really concentrated.
That's a good way to put it. And our mission today, it's very specific, but also, well, absolutely essential if you want to understand the big picture, the grand story of redemption.
Right.
We're here to equip you, the listener, with a solid framework. Think of it like a conceptual architecture.
Okay.
And this framework lets you link things together. You can connect those historical conflicts and covenants you read about in the Old Testament.
Like Joshua's campaigns.
Exactly like Joshua's campaigns, yeah.
Yeah.
It helps you link those directly to the cosmic end-time judgment scenes we find described in the New Testament, especially here in Revelation.
That sounds like the ultimate aha moment in studying prophecy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Connecting the dots all the way from, say, Sinai to the Second Coming.
It really is.
It feels like a huge task, maybe a bit daunting. But the great assurance we get from Bible scholars is that the Bible itself, well, if you approach it with the right tools, it offers just profound clarity, even on these really complex prophecies.
That's the key, the tools and the approach.
So our goal is that you walk away not just, well-informed with facts, but truly inspired by the sheer scale and beauty of God's redemptive plan.
Indeed. And this insight, guided by sound methods, it really offers tremendous understanding and, frankly, peace in what can feel like a very confusing world. So, yeah, we're excited to unpack it with you.
Absolutely. And just before we dive into that throne room scene, a quick reminder for everyone listening. If you find this kind of discussion helpful, enriching, please don't miss out on our main and bonus episodes of Bible Talk Insight. They offer continuous learning and encouragement.
Good point.
And you can also find our community online. Get daily devotionals, too. Just search for Bible Talk Insight over on Facebook.
Worth checking out.
Okay, let's get started. You can't build a house starting with the roof, right? You need a foundation.
True.
So before we even crack open Revelation itself, we really need to talk about the essential tools. The tools for approaching any biblical text, honestly.
Crucial first step.
Because if we want to understand prophecy, we can't just jump in with all our, modern ideas and assumptions. We need structure.
Yeah.
We're dealing with, well, basically a specialized science of study here.
That's right. And that science, the governing umbrella term, is called hermeneutics.
Hermeneutics.
Yeah. It's both the science and the art of interpretation. It lays down the principles, the rules, the methodology for understanding the text correctly.
Okay, like the ground rules.
Think of it like the constitutional law for reading the Bible, if you will. It tells us how to handle things like genre, context, language, all that crucial background stuff.
And within that broader science, hermeneutics, there's the actual doing of it, the practical application, like the difference between knowing the rules of grammar and actually writing a sentence.
Exactly. That active application, that's exegesis.
Exegesis.
Exegesis is the specific vital act of drawing out the meaning that is actually within the biblical text itself. The word itself literally means to lead out.
To lead out, okay.
And this leads us straight to the most foundational principle for any serious scholarly look at the Bible.
Yep.
We must always practice exegesis, drawing the meaning out of the text.
And the danger, which, let's be honest, happens way too often in popular discussions about prophecy, is doing the exact opposite.
Precisely. The opposite has a name, too. It's called eisegesis. That's imposing our own meaning, maybe our interpretation of current events or our favorite doctrines, imposing them onto the text.
Reading things into it instead of drawing things out.
That's it. And that's why this distinction, exegesis versus eisegesis, is just so critically important. If the text uses a word like beast, for example, the faithful exegete, the person doing exegesis, has to figure out what the Bible means by beast. They have to use internal references within Scripture, look at the historical context,
Right.
rather than just immediately jumping to, oh, well, that must be the latest world leader I don't like.
Yeah, that happens a lot. So if a prophet like John, writing in the 1st century, uses symbols that were common back then, we absolutely have to look back at that historical context, how he was communicating.
Absolutely. We have to let the biblical text speak for itself in its original setting. The Bible presents itself as, well, the final word in controversy and the bedrock of all faith. The principles governing faith and how we live, they're given in their fullness only within its pages.
Okay.
And when we approach Scripture, we have to remember this profound paradox, really. While God's divine influence is absolutely there, conveying his message, it happens through the human words, the literary styles, the expressions of the actual biblical writers.
So the message is divine, from God.
Yeah.
But the delivery system, the vehicle, is human language, culture, history.
Exactly. And that means we simply cannot ignore the world the prophet lived and wrote in.
Makes sense.
To really get the depth of the message, we have to study the historical background. It helps us understand why these specific literary expressions were chosen, why these symbols were used.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Understanding what something like a lampstand meant to a Jewish audience in the first century, that unlocks the meaning of the seven churches back in Revelation chapter 1. It's really the only reliable way to avoid just imposing our 21st century mindset onto an ancient text. This careful, structured study, this is what ensures the message we pull out is the one God actually intended to communicate. And this proper understanding, well, it sets the stage for seeing that inevitable clash between the forces of evil and the power of God.
Okay, so we have our tools established. Hermeneutics provides the rules, the framework, and exegesis is the actual practice of drawing meaning out of the text.
That's the foundation.
Now we can apply these tools specifically to the book of Revelation, which, as we know, is notoriously complex. And that complexity, I suppose, is why there are so many different interpretations floating around out there.
It really boils down to the framework, the methodology you choose to use.
Right.
Scholars approach Revelation using various methods. We can sort of briefly categorize the main systems into maybe three major approaches. First, there's idealism.
Idealism, okay.
This view tends to see Revelation primarily as a symbolic struggle. It's about the enduring principles of good versus evil. So it has relevance for every age, which is a strength, but it often disconnects the prophecy from any specific historical timeline.
Okay. More symbolic, less historical sequence. Then you've got the approach that seems most common in popular culture today, which is futurism.
Yes, futurism is very prevalent. Futurism basically maintains that most of Revelation, usually everything from chapter 4 onward, describes events that are still in the future.
Right, haven't happened yet.
Exactly. And these events are seen as taking place in a very short, super concentrated period of time, right before the second coming of Christ. This view is often linked with ideas like a pre-tribulation or mid-tribulation rapture.
Okay. And the third system, the one that offers that longer, continuous view of God working through history. That's the one Bible scholars often lean towards, isn't it? Historicism.
Absolutely. The historicist approach is considered by many, many Bible scholars to be the most appropriate framework for Revelation. And the reason is that it portrays the continuous course of history.
Continuous, okay.
Right. From the time of the apostles, the first century, stretching all the way through history to the very end of time. It treats Revelation not as like a disconnected end times drama that suddenly appears, but more like a map detailing the entire Christian era from beginning to end.
Now, some critics might argue that historicism can be a bit subjective, trying to match prophecies to historical events. How do Bible scholars defend this approach? Is there evidence within Revelation itself that supports this kind of continuous historical timeline?
That's a fair question. The defense really lies in the internal structure of the book itself. Just look at how it flows.
Okay.
Revelation kicks off with those 7 letters to 7 specific churches in chapters 2 and 3. Now, scholars widely recognize that these churches represent more than just 7 literal first-century congregations.
Right, they symbolize different eras in the church.
Exactly.
Okay.
They represent 7 successive historical phases or eras of the Christian church, starting right there in the apostolic era and moving forward through time.
That makes sense. So the churches themselves set a kind of timeline.
Precisely. And then what follows immediately after the heavenly enthronement scene in chapters 4 and 5, it's the 7 seals in Revelation 6. And these 7 seals run chronologically parallel to the 7 churches. They start in the same apostolic era, and they describe the major historical events, the conditions, both the internal spiritual state of the church and the external consequences it faced over the centuries.
So they mirror each other through history.
Yes. This parallel structure, the churches and the seals running side by side through history, provides really powerful support for the historicist view. It strongly suggests the visions are detailing the progression of the church and world history leading up to the final climax. It confirms this continuous historical nature, not just a sudden leap into the distant future.
Okay, that structural argument is quite compelling. With that historicist framework, then, let's turn our gaze heavenward. Revelation chapters 4 and 5, this is where John gives us this incredible, almost overwhelming vision of God's throne room. What's the precise timing and the significance of this scene?
Yeah, these chapters are absolutely pivotal. They establish the heavenly setting, the stage, right before the historical visions start unfolding with the seals in Revelation 6. What we're witnessing here is this crucial ceremonial moment, the enthronement of the resurrected Christ.
And just to be clear, this isn't depicted as some future coronation still waiting to happen, right? Bible scholars place this event firmly in historical time.
It's presented as an accomplished fact. Based on careful analysis of the New Testament structure and flow, this enthronement, Christ being officially installed upon the heavenly throne, it happened at Pentecost, right after his ascension.
Pentecost, okay.
Think about Peter's sermon in the book of Acts chapter 2. He affirms this directly. He states clearly that Christ was exalted by the right hand of God, taking his position as the universal Lord.
Let's just linger in that scene for a second. It's so majestic, isn't it? The rainbow around the throne, the thunder and lightning, that sea of glass like crystal, the 24 elders. What's the spiritual meaning packed into all that visual language?
Oh, the imagery is incredibly rich, and it's steeped in Old Testament temple liturgy. Those 24 elders, for instance, they likely represent the totality of God's redeemed people throughout history.
All of them.
Yeah, think 12 patriarchs representing redeemed Israel from the Old Testament, and 12 apostles representing the New Testament church. Their presence there, worshiping before the throne, affirms the culmination of God's entire plan of salvation and the 7 spirits of God before the throne. That symbolizes the perfect, complete presence and power of the Holy Spirit ready to be poured out for the church's mission, which, of course, happens right there at Pentecost. The whole scene is about God establishing his universal government, his authority over everything.
So when Christ takes his seat on that heavenly throne, what exactly does that signify in terms of his governmental role? What power does he assume?
He assumes a dual role, really. He takes on both the royal office, he is king, and the judging office.
King and judge.
King and judge. And his worthiness, his absolute fitness to hold these incredibly transcendent roles is powerfully symbolized by that description of him having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God.
Okay, what do the horns and eyes represent?
The horns, in biblical symbolism, represent complete power and authority to rule. 7 horns means absolute power, and the 7 eyes symbolize his complete divine omniscience, his perfect ability, and his absolute right to govern and to judge the entire universe with perfect fairness and knowledge.
Total power, total knowledge. Got it. But the real dramatic tension, the heart of chapter 5, seems to revolve around that sealed scroll. It's sealed with 7 seals, and John starts weeping because nobody in heaven or on earth is found worthy to open it. Until the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Lamb who was slain, steps forward. What is this scroll?
Right, that scroll is central. It's taken by Christ, who is recognized here both as the Lion, the King from Judah's line, and as the Lamb who was slain, the ideal king of the Davidic lineage, the promised eschatological son. Now, taking this scroll, it's far more than just, picking up a book. It's a deeply profound, formal, ceremonial act. It's his inauguration into his universal dominion and lordship over the entire world.
His inauguration.
Yes. Bible scholars generally agree that the scroll represents something like the title deed to the earth. It contains the blueprint for all future events, the full revelation of God's ultimate plan, and crucially, the legal mechanism for executing judgment and reclaiming everything that sin had stolen or corrupted.
Wow. The title deed to the earth. And you mentioned earlier there's an Old Testament parallel for this kind of ceremonial act, receiving a scroll or a book.
Yes, it connects directly back to the traditions surrounding Israelite kingship. Remember when a new king was proclaimed, like Joash or Josiah in the Old Testament?
Yeah.
They would often receive the crown and a copy of the covenant book, usually the book of Deuteronomy. Possessing that book, that scroll, demonstrated the king's legitimate right to rule. It showed his authority to deal with any crisis, whether military or spiritual. So, by taking the scroll here in Revelation 5, Christ is confirming his absolute authority as co-ruler with the Father.
So the scroll isn't just about authority, it's also about responsibility.
Precisely. That covenant book served as a constant reminder to the Israelite king, the Davidic descendant, that he was ultimately responsible to Yahweh, the great king overall, for how he exercised his power. So by accepting this sealed scroll in Revelation 5, Christ is essentially confirming his responsibility to execute justice, to carry out judgment, and to bring God's entire redemptive plan to its final, successful completion.
Okay, that's huge. Now, just to clarify something. If Christ is installed in his judging office right here at Pentecost, Is this the final judgment scene we often think about?
No, that's a really important clarification. Bible scholars are quite clear on this. Revelation 4 and 5 describe the installation, the assumption of the authority needed to execute judgment.
Okay, getting the authority.
Right. The actual execution of that judgment begins to unfold immediately with the opening of the seals in Revelation 6, and it continues through the trumpets and the later plagues. The full final judgment, that great reckoning that brings all of human history to its conclusion, that happens much later in the book, over in Revelation 20. But you could say the clock starts ticking right here in chapter 5.
It sounds like the very moment Christ takes that scroll and accepts the mantle of universal dominion, well, conflict on earth becomes almost inevitable, a necessity even.
That is the tragic but necessary link to the conflict we see on earth. The very emergence of sin, of rebellion against God, necessitates violence in a sense. Because the rebellious party, Satan, and those aligned with him, clings fiercely to its supposed rights, its claimed dominion over this world. This initial intrusion of sin into human existence demanded a divine response. It set up an unavoidable clash between the forces of evil and the sovereign power of God. So Christ's enthronement means that this cosmic conflict is now fully engaged on both the heavenly and the earthly levels. The battle lines are drawn.
Okay, so Revelation 4 and 5 establish that heavenly context, Christ's enthronement at Pentecost. Then Revelation 6 immediately dives into the opening of the seven seals. If we're using that historicist framework we discussed, what historical period are we looking at with these seals?
Right, the opening of the seals describes a continuous historical era. It covers the entire time span from Christ's ascension and enthronement, so starting with the early church, all the way through history until his second coming.
The whole Christian era, essentially.
The whole Christian era, and crucially, the events depicted in Revelation 6, the famous four horsemen, and the events that follow these are the consequences of the breaking of the seals. They're the results of Christ beginning to exercise his authority, beginning to govern. They are not the disclosure of what's written inside the scroll itself. That comes later.
Okay, consequences. And these consequences are pretty grim, aren't they? War, famine, disease, death. If Christ is the one opening the seals, how do we reconcile these painful, destructive events with a God of love? That's a tough question for many people.
It is a tough question and an important one. The key is to understand that these events, the suffering, the tribulations symbolized by the four horsemen, they connect directly back to the covenant woes or curses that are laid out in detail back in the Old Testament.
Covenant curses.
Yes. These were, in a sense, technical, predictable consequences that were specified for apostasy, for disloyalty within the covenant community itself. When God's people chose to abandon his ways, his law, and trust in their own strength or in idols, they essentially invited these consequences upon themselves according to the terms of the covenant they had entered into.
Can you give us some specific examples? Where might John be getting the template for these four horsemen?
Oh, the template is drawn almost directly from prophetic warnings you find in places like Ezekiel, chapter 14.
Cool.
Ezekiel explicitly lists the four severe judgments God sends upon rebellious nations or cities. He names them the sword and the famine and the wild beasts and the pestilence.
Sword, famine, wild beasts, pestilence.
And those are the very forces unleashed by the first four seals, aren't they? The red horse brings the sword, representing war. The black horse brings famine and economic hardship. The pale horse represents disease, pestilence, and death. And power is given over the fourth part of the earth, including by the wild beasts.
Wow, that is an incredibly tight link. It's almost verbatim.
It is.
So the seals, then, they're not random acts of divine anger or malice. They're more like the natural historical progression of God's judgments against widespread apostasy and rebellion, mirroring consequences that were already laid out centuries earlier in books like Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28.
Exactly. When societies, or even the covenant community itself, turn away from the principles of life, from covenant obedience, they effectively step outside the sphere of God's special protection. The seals are, in one sense, the historical outworking, the acknowledgement that humanity is reaping what it has sown: war, scarcity, disease, death. But, and this is crucial, all while Christ is still ruling, still restraining ultimate chaos, still holding the scroll.
So even these negative events are under his control.
Yes, the seals demonstrate that even these harsh historical realities are permitted and ultimately controlled by the one who holds the destiny of the world in his hands.
This brings us back to something we touched on at the beginning, those Old Testament conflicts. How does a specific conflict, say Joshua's conquest of the Canaanites, serve as a kind of historical preview, a foretaste of this final judgment progression we see in Revelation?
That's a great connection to make. The conflicts led by Joshua, think about Jericho, Libnah, Hazor, all those Canaanite strongholds listed as enemies of Israel, they really serve a dual purpose in this grand cosmic drama.
Okay, what's the first purpose?
First, they clearly demonstrate God acting as the divine warrior. He is fighting for his people, intervening to secure the promised inheritance he had sworn to give them.
God fighting for them.
Yes. But second, and maybe more relevant to Revelation, they act as a kind of historical microcosm, a small-scale preview, a foretaste of the final universal judgment against worldwide rebellion against God. The Canaanites weren't just being judged arbitrarily. The Bible indicates they had reached a point of extreme iniquity, a radical opposition to Yahweh, effectively positioning themselves as active enemies in the cosmic conflict.
But didn't the Bible scholars also highlight a kind of paradox about Israel even needing to fight these battles in the first place?
Yes, and this gives us really deep insight into the nature of faith and trust. In God's original ideal plan, Israel actually never needed to fight these battles themselves.
Really?
Think back to the Red Sea crossing. What did Moses tell the terrified Israelites? Fear ye not, stand still and see the salvation of Jehovah. Jehovah will fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace.
Right, God would fight for them.
Their ultimate success, their security, always lay in trusting the Lord completely, implicitly. Bible scholars often note that Israel's later active participation in the conquest of Canaan was, in large part, actually a consequence of their own unbelief, their failure to fully trust God after he brought them out of Egypt.
Huh. So their fighting the Canaanites was necessary partly because of their spiritual failings, not necessarily because that was God's preferred method A.
Precisely. Their human effort, when it became necessary, was permitted perhaps to teach them lessons about unconditional trust in Yahweh's help. It constantly reminded them that the real outcome of any conflict, military or spiritual, ultimately rested entirely in the Lord's hands, not their own strength.
So these Old Testament conflicts show God intervening.
Yes, they reveal divine intervention in history as a manifestation of this larger cosmic struggle. They portray God as a warrior, foreshadowing the ultimate victory that will finally conclude the great controversy between good and evil. When sin enters the picture, neutrality just isn't an option anymore. The conflict inevitably creates only two sides: those who choose to stand with God and those who align themselves with rebellion.
Okay, so as this historical era symbolized by the seals progresses through centuries, we inevitably move closer to the climax, Christ's second coming. But before that final event, Revelation seems to describe a massive final intervention, a last call from God.
Yes, exactly. That intervention is the end-time global proclamation of the everlasting gospel. It's a worldwide prophesying, a final mission that echoes Jesus' own words in Matthew 24:14. Remember, the gospel must be preached in the whole world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come.
Right, the final witness.
This is God's last, loving, universal call to humanity before probation closes.
And Revelation 10 introduces this incredibly powerful figure, an angel who seems to embody the authority of this final message. The description is amazing, almost Christ-like imagery.
It really is. This is the strong angel of Revelation 10, and the imagery used is intentionally reminiscent of Christ himself. He's clothed in a cloud, often a symbol of divine presence. He has a rainbow over his head, the sign of God's covenant faithfulness and mercy. His face shines like the sun. His feet are like pillars of fire.
Very divine attributes.
Absolutely. And his voice is described as the mighty roar of a lion, which is often used in prophecy to depict the voice of God. This messenger, clearly commissioned directly by the enthroned Christ in heaven, comes bearing a special final message for the world.
And this angel holds a small scroll, but this one is open, right? A Biblaridion. John is told to take it and eat it. What's the meaning behind that famous bittersweet experience John has?
Yes, little open scroll. Scholars generally understand this as a partial, now unsealed disclosure of the contents of that larger sealed scroll Christ took back in Revelation 5.
A part of the bigger plan revealed.
Exactly. The content, likely related to prophetic timing or perhaps identifying key players in the final conflict, is described as sweet to receive. And God's word, his truth, is always a source of joy and delight when we first grasp it.
Sweet in the mouth.
Sweet in the mouth. But then it becomes bitter in the stomach for the messenger representing the church who has to proclaim it. This bitterness signals a profound disappointment. Specifically, it relates to the delay of the expected immediate end of Earth's history.
They thought the end was right then.
It seems the early church, perhaps, anticipated the sounding of the seventh trumpet, which signals the final judgment, would happen much sooner. But this message reveals the work isn't finished yet. There's a delay.
So instead of the immediate end, they receive a renewed mission, a global one.
Precisely. John, representing God's people, is told he must prophesy again concerning many peoples, nations, tongues, and kings. The end is not quite yet. A final, worldwide message, the everlasting gospel in its final emphasis, must still go out. This is the ultimate outreach, reaching every corner of the globe.
And it's this worldwide message, then, that forces the final, ultimate division of humanity. It clarifies definitively who belongs on which side of this great cosmic conflict.
It does exactly that. The final global proclamation of the gospel, especially as it's summarized in the powerful 3 angels' messages found in Revelation chapter 14, verses 6 through 13. This acts as God's ultimate final warning and appeal.
3 angels' messages.
Okay. And this message effectively divides all people into just 2 distinct camps. There are those who respond positively to the everlasting gospel, who choose to worship the Creator, honor his law, and give their allegiance to Christ.
That's one group.
And then there are those who reject the message, who choose instead to worship the beast power and effectively align themselves with Satan's rebellion. In the end, allegiance, who you worship, who you obey, becomes the sole defining characteristic.
And how are God's faithful people often symbolized by that group called the 144,000 in Revelation 14? How are they identified in this final, incredibly polarizing struggle?
They are identified primarily by their absolute allegiance to God. They are described as having God's name written on their foreheads.
On their foreheads?
Now, this isn't likely a literal, visible inscription like a tattoo. It's a deep, spiritual signifier. It symbolizes that their minds, their thoughts, their characters have come to reflect God's own perfect, loving character.
A reflection of his character.
Yes, it manifests as total loyalty to the enthroned Christ and obedience to his commandments, rooted in faith. This spiritual identification, the seal of God, separates them unequivocally from the massive end-time deception, which is characterized by receiving the mark of the beast, symbolizing allegiance to the rebellious powers instead of God.
Okay, finally then, this long cosmic conflict that started way back with the intrusion of sin, it culminates in this final spiritual battle known often as Armageddon. Can we just clarify the scholarly view on what Armageddon actually represents? Is it a literal place?
That's a really common question. Based on how John uses Old Testament imagery, Armageddon is best understood fundamentally as a worldwide spiritual conflict. It's not primarily about a literal geographical battle fought in a specific valley in the Middle East.
So more spiritual than geographical.
Much more spiritual. John seems to be drawing powerful parallels to defining Old Testament showdowns where the issue of ultimate allegiance was settled. The most famous example is probably Elijah's contest against the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel back in 1 Kings 18.
The Mount Carmel showdown. Choose this day who you will serve.
Exactly. Just as Elijah challenged ancient Israel to make a final decision about who the true God was, so in the end times, the satanic forces symbolized by the dragon, the beast, and the false prophet gather their deceived followers for this final global showdown. It's the ultimate contest of loyalty and worship.
And just like on Mount Carmel, the outcome is already guaranteed because of Christ's authority, right?
Absolutely. Armageddon isn't a battle where the outcome is in doubt. It represents heaven's decisive, dramatic response to the centuries of rebellion and, importantly, to the cries of God's persecuted people asking for deliverance and justice. It guarantees the final, irreversible defeat of the satanic trinity and the entire system of false worship and prophecy they created.
So the power that stood against God.
The power that stood in opposition to God, the power whose rebellion necessitated all those historical consequences we saw unfolding under the seals. That power is finally and completely dismantled by the returning Christ. It brings the great cosmic drama to its ultimate victorious conclusion.
Wow. This has been an incredibly detailed and I think really necessary exploration. We've really tried to crack the code, so to speak, on Revelation 4 through 6. We've established those essential hermeneutical tools, understood the cosmic setting of Christ and enthronement back at Pentecost, traced the historic nature of the seals and the covenant consequences they represent.
Right.
And importantly, recognized that prophetic link connecting conflicts from way back in Joshua's time all the way forward to Christ's ultimate guaranteed triumph at the end.
And I think the central enduring inspiration we should take away from the study of the Bible and the insights from Bible scholars is really this. Every single event in history, from the moment Christ assumed his authority in heaven to that final worldwide warning message, it's all controlled entirely by Christ.
He's in control.
He is the one who took the sealed scroll. He holds the destiny of the world, and he is the one who loves the human race so deeply, ensuring the ultimate triumph of his faithful followers. So cultivating a life that actually reflects this knowledge, this character of God, that's truly our highest calling as we live in this time, awaiting his return.
Well said. And we really encourage you, our listeners, to subscribe to Bible Talk Insight if you haven't already for continued learning and inspiration. And please do join us over on Facebook as well. Share these insights with others in the community.
Definitely. And before we wrap up, maybe we can leave everyone with a final thought, something to really mull over this week.
Okay, let's hear it.
Considering Christ's enthronement and Sliff, his assumption of the judging office way back at Pentecost, as we saw in Revelation 5, and then seeing the subsequent historical seals in Revelation 6 that trace the outworking of judgment throughout history, how should this reality change how you live? How should it impact how you proclaim the everlasting gospel today, knowing that judgment isn't just some future event, but is actually an ongoing process being executed right now under his complete and righteous authority?
That's a powerful thought to reflect on. How does his current role as judge impact us now? Excellent. Well, until next time, keep seeking insight, keep growing in knowledge and inspiration. Goodbye for now.
Goodbye, everyone.